So I'd like you all to welcome two of our favorite guys here tonight together, Gregg Hurwitz, Joe Fender, to the Poison Pen. Now, while you're sitting down, I'm going to show off. We had a brief tussle. Thomas Harris, a new book, Kari Mora, and it's got my name printed in it. It's nice. Gregg asked who he had to sleep with in order to get one, and I said, Kirby. But isn't that cool? It says this early reading copy is for Barbara Peters' Poison Pen, number 48 of 300. Wow.
Dust that for fingerprints?
Right.
I love me some
Right.
Thomas Harris, boy.
And I will mention to you that it's on sale May 21st. So it's been, has the book, what, about every 10 years? Is that right?
Yeah, I was 7 or 10, yeah.
You have to use that.
Oh, right, I forgot.
Right, sorry about
10
that.
years,
Right.
7 or 10 years.
Right. But in any case, we have a lot of things to talk about tonight, and I see that we forgot to put books on the table. So why don't the two, Andrew King, when you have a free moment, would you like to bring up a copy of each of their books just for fun? Okay.
Or two other people's books.
Yeah.
We'll pretend.
We could do that too. Right. So Joe, you've gotten here from Boston, which I think is a wonderful achievement given the polar vortex.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I gotta tell you, my wife tried to open the car door today in Boston and it was frozen shut. I heard that and I just thought, oh, sorry.
I say that because Joe, bless his heart, has been here in the summer all the time.
My usual gig is to come here in June or July and it is 126 degrees.
I know.
It's like walking into a pizza oven.
It is. So I promised him that if he switched to winter, that he would like it better. But Gregg comes from Los Angeles, so it's not either on fire or flooded or blowing away as we speak.
Everything right now is non-biblical in California. Great for spite.
I love it. So, actually, your books are both very topical in the sense that the plots. I just love both of these books. I won't gloat too much about. Well, I said to Gregg, my only political statement: every person's dream, me anyway, is the substance of the plot.
We're just kidding. NSA listening in. We're just totally joking.
No, I'm not. I'm really not. But there, I do think you've been remarkably clever. But Joe, you've tapped into a number of interesting things because you have a judge that it's Linwood Barkley and his wife, more
Hey,
authors.
Linwood.
Come on, there's seats. We'll find them for you. Linwood is here as our writer in residence through the weekend, and he's teaching a writer's workshop on Sunday, and he'll be here with Ian Rankin tomorrow night.
Another fugitive from the cold.
Oh, yeah.
People in Toronto, I thought, deserved, right? Anyway, back to Joe. I thought it was really brave of you to give the judge, put her in an invidious position by an act of her own, rather than, I mean, let's face it, she actually has too much to drink and sleeps with a guy in Chicago.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting because you could have maybe set her up for something that wasn't her fault, but you decided that was
It's her fault, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but my wife keeps pointing out that, first of all, the guy was very appealing. And not just physically. The guy she meets, she's at a she's a judge, she's at a law conference, and she's having a drink, and she meets this guy who tells her that they end up talking, and his wife was killed, and he's raising his daughter alone, and she's completely won over by him and his vulnerability, and they sleep together, and they agree at the end of it that they will never see each other again. This is a one-time thing. This was a mistake. She's a mother. She's got 2 kids herself. She goes back to Chicago, and 2 days later, into the courtroom walks that guy, and he is representing one of the parties in the lawsuit that she's presiding over. So
Actually, she went back to Boston.
Yeah, did I not say that? Yeah, she went back to Boston.
Right, because she's at Massachusetts,
She's
Superior Court
Superior
judge.
Court judge.
Right.
Yeah. And I
Not no superior anymore. That's
Not
a
more-
classic Fender premise. I love it. Love it.
Thanks, Greg. So she's in this situation. So just to take it a little bit further, So she's got this dilemma. She's supposed to recuse herself because, right? But in order to recuse herself, she's going to have to tell why, and she can't. And then it emerges that there is a videotape of their encounter, and she's told that if she doesn't go along with what they want, she's basically screwed. That video is going to go public. So she's completely trapped. And
You should leave it there.
I should leave it there. Exactly.
Absolutely. But I just thought it was a really great setup, you know, because it could have, Gregg, as a writer, would you think it was a risky thing to do to put her, you know?
I thought you were going to ask me if I'm going to sleep with someone when I go to Chicago.
No.
I think you should have titled it Twice Screwed. If you really had guts, man. That would be the title. I love that. I love the Joe big concept thrillers. It's so great. Yeah, I got it, read the first 2 chapters, like standing by the mailbox.
I think it's great too, but my question is, would you have thought she might be more sympathetic if the reason she's in this position was something that happened to her rather than something she brought on herself?
No, oddly I don't. And part of why I think that it's a good call to do that is because if you just tell stories about bad things happening to good people, it's like that's pancreatic cancer, right?
Right.
Like the stuff of narrative has to be that something embedded in the character is the thing that opens the door to unforeseen consequences.
Exactly.
So that the plot becomes an unfolding of something that's psychological. And it doesn't mean that the blowback is commensurate with what the misstep is, but it's got to be some moral misstep that opens the door to all this. And so I think, that's the tradition, right? And
Right.
I think it was, I want to say it's somebody who had remarked that that in tragedy, like in Greek tragedy or Shakespearean tragedy, it's the fall of a king from the throne. And in noir, not that we're writing noir, but to illustrate it, it's the fall from the curb into the gutter. It's a similar thing, but it's a similar principle. So you don't have, King Lear doesn't get taken down because people are mean.
It's his own flaws.
Well,
Exactly.
actually, I asked you that because I was going to pay you a compliment. I agree with Gregg. See, I thought it was terrific that you did it, but I also thought it was a real test of your skills as a novelist to make people care about, about her and root for her, even though this has happened. I thought it was just a dazzling thing to do.
It's one of the challenges I set for myself when I wrote this book. I said she's going to sleep with the guy, and she has to be appealing, nonetheless, right? Well, so does he. Exactly right. Sympathetic.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And brave, and she's really brave, it's not that different. I was talking to Tom Perry when he was here because his new book has got a burglar, and we were talking about the fact that if you set up like a burglar as your detective, like Larry Black used to do, then you've got that whole thing to overcome, while in the course of committing a burglary, let's say they, surprise, find a body, then how do they proceed from there? And I think that is really, it's easy to write, a sympathetic superhero or something, but I'm not talking about Orphan X, because I'm not, because he's so great, but I do think that, one of the reasons that your book is so good is because you took that approach.
Thank you. I wanted to have her morally flawed, but I also wanted us to sort of see the ramifications of what happened on her marriage, on her family, as well as on her career. So I really wanted to get as much. I wanted this to be sort of a family-centric story.
Well, people forget that sympathetic is different than likable. Like they're two different lanes,
Yeah.
And especially, if someone's compelling, you can't take your eyes off them.
Right.
And I think we want to see in characters some aspect that we recognize in ourselves. And so a lot of times it's the flaws, or it's the missteps, or it's the bits of cluelessness that's the entry point for readers to feel like they're engaged in a story.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of young writers, you see, God, my first book I wrote when I was a kid, there's sections of it I wrote when I was 19, and like no one should ever be held accountable for anything that they said when they're 19. But I think
Except for Kavanaugh.
Yeah. I Mary Shelley. Oh, we're going that route.
Sorry.
I thought you were going to go like John Keats or something. And then,
Politics is creeping in.
you have, like with younger writers, you have a lot of that. Like he was the best of the best, right? You have the stuff where you're trying to like tell the reader how amazing the character is, and there's almost a repellent aspect to that.
Yeah.
Versus when you open someone up and they do something shitty and then they feel really bad about it and they're trying to fix it and they're trying to focus with it, because that's what we do all the time.
Right.
You know, we all imperfectly stumble onward.
Same with Orphan X. Right?
Yeah. There's a lot of things he can't figure out. I mean, the main, you know, for years before I wrote this, because I'd written I think 10 standalones straight before I was doing a series character, and I was almost afraid to write it, so I kept sliding it to the back burner and writing another book and another book. But the tome I was reading during that time that I kept going back to like a Bible is there's a great dialogue between Steven Spielberg, Lawrence Kasdan, and George Lucas when they were developing Indiana Jones. It's amazing. And so you're watching these three minds sort of, you know, masticate this in real time. And they're like, well, he should have a weapon that's different or distinctive. You know, it's like, well, how about a whip? You know, and it's also like pre-political correctness, so it's also great. They're like, well, there should be some impropriety with a girl who's younger. It's like, let's make her in high school. It's like, no, let's really not make her in high school. But you have these three narrative geniuses figuring out what makes something unique. And so with Orphan X, the thing that I thought about is, with all the characters that we love, who are the big badass characters, the Reachers, the Bournes, the Bonds, the Joe Pikes, we don't often see them go home, right? So you don't get to see James Bond have an awkward encounter with a single mom in the elevator, or get harassed by the elderly Jewish lady who may or may not be based on my grandma, like in the elevator, right? And so we don't get to have all these moments. And I thought, what if I could create an archetypal character who's capable of that, where his comfort level is like calculating the cosine compensation on a sniper round, but he's completely undone if he has to make small talk. And so he's living among people who are living the kind of lives that he might want but can never have. And that's the sort of the point of entry, I think, for readers.
Well, I thought one of the features of your book that I particularly like is that you took us back and reminded us of things about Orphan X that you told us when you wrote Orphan X, or that came out in Orphan X. But this book gives you a chance to kind of reprise all that, because you know, here he is, hunted by Orphan A. I keep wanting to call him Agent A, but he's Orphan A. And the guy that set up the program in which he was trained is now in the White House and turning on his. So in order to make all that clear, you had to go back and refresh everything, but you did it in such a way that it was, you know, it was fresh.
Well, thank you. I mean, I started with his first mission when he was 19. So Orphan X, you know, taken out of a foster home at the age of 12 and trained to be an assassin. And the opening of the book is actually is the first mission he ever completed. He's 19 years old, you know, in a drizzly, gray Eastern European city. And the then Undersecretary of Defense, when we come to the president, is now the highly corrupt president of the United States. And so the book is essentially the Day of the Jackal, but Orphan X is going to take down the president of the United States, and we're rooting for him to do so. And so my Google search history is severely damning. I mean, it's like a hotel with best view of White House entrance, you know. But yeah, and so the first stage that I did, you know, there's a line that says that we should write ourselves into a corner and then figure out how to get out of it.
Yeah.
And I did all this research in the Secret Service, and it's amazing. Like the door of Cadillac 1 or Beast 1, the presidential limousine, has the same heft as the door to a 747, right? And I mean, like all the security precautions and measures. And so I assembled all of them in front of me, and then I was staring at this wall like 3 miles high in front of me, thinking, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull this off. And then I just had to figure out some way through that I hope you'll find compelling to get to, you know, it's sort of the ultimate nowhere man mission. Like, how do you get to the most heavily guarded and protected individual on the face of the planet?
Well, your technology was absolutely dazzling, and one of the questions I was going to ask you is it for real, or did you make some of it up?
It's all pretty much for real.
Is that?
Yeah.
Wow. Can I interrupt a minute? I see a number of you standing over there. There are chairs. If you'd like to move across here, there's 2 chairs over here and 1 over there. I just ask you not to knock the camera over or walk in front of it. So there's a chair there, 2 there, 1 here, and a couple over there. Sorry, but I hate to see people standing when we can actually see them. Right.
So you base that on basically the format of Day of the Jackal, where we end up rooting for an assassin to kill de Gaulle. It's an amazing book.
Yeah, it's an incredible book. But I think the sympathies are split. Like, there's that moment in Day of the Jackal where he strangles the woman. That, like, there's a clear turn that you're not.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's interesting because we both have this play about trying to elicit sympathy. Because usually you're not rooting for the character who's going to assassinate the President of the United States.
Right.
Barbara, don't say anything. And you know, so that's a trick to make him sufficiently unlikable and dangerous, and to make Evan tied into the mission sufficiently, and to give it a personal handle. And he has a very personal nowhere man mission as well in the book. And so, you know, but that's always, you know, it's a trick.
Yeah.
That's true, but that's not the only plot. The other part of the plot is that Orphan A is hunting Orphan X. So while Orphan X is hunting the president, Orphan A is hunting Orphan X. And so I thought, you know, it was really wonderful how these lines kind of go back and forth.
You know, there's these scenes, I'm sure you have these, that like there's always a scene in the back of your head and you finally find the right book for it.
Yeah.
And I always had a notion of the scene of a maximum security prison and this guy in the cell, like super dangerous and solitary, and one morning wakes up and the cell door's open. And he walks out and pushes it, and he's walking by and everyone's there, and he gets to the end of the thing and like the guard's reading a newspaper in the internal shed. And he kind of clicks, he doesn't even look up, he clicks the buzzer and the next door clicks, and he walks across the thing and all the prisoners are looking at him. And he gets out to the entrance and the next door is unlocked, and he goes to the thing and they have like his clothes that he, you know, checked in with 7 years ago are sitting on, and he puts them in, and a phone rings in his pocket. And he picks up, and it's somebody who says, there's a Camry parked in the parking lot, you know, the keys to it are in your other pocket, go out and get in the car and drive away. Mm-hmm. And he just walks out of prison. So it's sort of like that, you know, to hunt a monster, you need a monster, right. And that's what Orphan X is, that's what Evan is, but then the original orphan of Orphan A is released to track him down while he's tracking the president. And I always had that scene, like, it's a scene looking for a character.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it's a great scene.
It's a scene looking for video too of some sort, either a movie or TV. I mean, it is that the action in your book is extraordinary. It's so visual when you're reading it. You can track along. But I love that idea that you've got 2 hunts going on. You know, you've got one guy moving in one direction and then the other guy coming at him. Salam, you know, you guys have really just like dazzled us with your skills in these books. It's wonderful. Wasn't it great they could come together? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Joe and I go back a long ways. Joe actually gave me some really key advice early in my career that was very helpful. I don't know if you know that. We have a personal connection. Yeah, I had. I was knocking around publishers and I needed some advice. Joe happened to be in LA and I had a launch event and we went out and got a drink after, and he kind of sat down and gave me a lot of advice that was hugely helpful of who helped me figure out who the right publisher and editor was to steer into, and I've been with them for 10 books now, and we just re-upped last week for 3 more. So.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah,
That's wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Orphan or something else?
Orphan.
All orphan.
A lot of orphans.
All orphan all the time.
Yeah. So.
Well, there's a spoiler. You know that Orphan A obviously didn't completely take him out.
Not yet.
Unless Orphan A is the new orphan.
Well, there's that too.
I'm always so grateful that he fell in the alphabet when they were assigning the letters that he was X. Because if he was orphan like B, it just doesn't have. It sounds like a suppository. You know, it would have been a disaster.
Right. Thank you.
Wasn't that clever? You had nothing to do with it.
I was so grateful. It was his time in the rotation came up.
So you've raised an interesting point, which is, Joe, you really love writing standalones. Why is that? I mean, I know you've written a couple of continuing characters.
Yeah, the book I'm writing now is the continuation of my Nick Heller series, which I've missed writing, I gotta tell you. The thing is, I come up with these ideas that are standalone ideas, and they're very different stories. When you do a standalone, the character's life can get turned upside down. But if you do a series book, there's only a limited range. You can't kill the guy, for example. You can't destroy his life and then have him come back in the next book. So it's a different kind of story you can tell. In fact, I just, this morning came on the plane, came up with an idea for a standalone, another one. So when I'm done with the Nick Heller one, I'll go back to the standalone. I alternate, that's my new pattern.
See, I think of it too as standalones. You can pick up the character anywhere you want, and you can leave him off anywhere you want.
That's right.
And so, like the premise
Yeah.
for Judgment, what's so great is it's like, okay, I need a judge, marry 2 kids, and here's this particular moment of her life. You don't have to pick up any threads. You're starting them all.
Right.
How did you what was your starting? Do you start with the one big idea and then work backwards?
Yeah, I start with the concept, figure out the character who's got to be there, and then I spend time researching the character to get a sense of what the character's skills are, what their flaws are, what their life is like. And in this case, I actually met with 5 different judges, all women judges in Boston, and I asked them what their home life is like and what it's like, what are their kids like.
And after the restraining order.
So I really got I was able to build up the character of Juliana by talking to these judges. The tough thing is, my legal education came from NBC, or CBS or something. I didn't go to law school. I didn't, So I had to sort of navigate legal stuff and make it. I figured if I can get it, my readers are going to get it.
Yes. Yeah,
You know?
that's always a good thing.
Yeah.
A quality that I appreciated in Gregg's book, since you've already realized that I'm technically incompetent, by the fact that I couldn't find Gregg or figure out how to turn off my phone. You managed to make all the technology perfectly not only plausible but understandable. So I wasn't sitting there, going, how's it work, or this is it, whatever. I mean, you really have a gift for making that, what's that word, accessible.
Yeah, well, I think Joe said it well. It's like if I, because I have a great Rolodex, right? Navy SEALs and like big CTOs who worked on the first firewall for hacking. And by the time I can digest it, then I can make it digestible. It's like that's sort of the rule for me is...
You've got to digest it first.
Exactly, and I'm not at a level of expertise. I kind of lead with my low IQ, is how I see it. if I can grapple with it enough to wrangle it mentally.
And that's
I'm
where
gonna
we
write
meet you.
I'm going to write that down. Linwood, are you over there taking notes? Please promise me that you just wrote down, I'm going to lead with a low IQ for your workshop on Sunday.
Yeah. Well, that's it. For some of these guys I'm talking with have so much more knowledge than I do. So I feel like going into their subject, I do feel like I have an IQ of about 80. And they're explaining all this stuff, and I can dig in. It's a ton of notes. They go on the record, off the record.
Yeah.
And then I can figure out how to do it. And the other thing I realized that's actually a lot of fun is that I don't want to just write like weapons porn, right? Like we've all read those books, right? Like it's the hardcore military where you're just reading everything about every...
Special ops thrillers, those are
Right.
called.
And for me, one of the things I like to do is I'll do a lot of the tech, but then I like to like undercut it playfully to make clear that, like I talk about his titanium, armored sunscreen in his penthouse that are like interwoven. He can stop a sniper round, and then I'll say, and they also provide excellent shade from the sun. Like I try and kind of undercut it a little bit. And the other thing that I have a lot of fun with, which I kind of stumbled into, I didn't actually plan this out this way, but all the people he goes to in his network are better at doing the thing than he is. And so he's kind of like Ulysses or Orphanex. He's like second or third in every category, and that's what makes him dominant. He has to bring the totality of who he is. He's not the biggest guy like Reacher, and he's not the suavest guy like Bond, so he needs to take everything. But a lot of the fun is like when he's dealing with Joey, who's a 16-year-old hacker, she knows way more about it than him and like completely denigrates him in the process. And so the give and take, or when he goes to Tommy Stojak, who's his armorer, like he knows way more about guns. So I have my hero constantly getting sort of banged up on irreverently by the other characters, which then I think is fun and serves as kind of a proxy for us, who are getting banged up and figuring it all out.
Right.
And you never want to cast too adoring an eye on your protagonist.
Well, That's a really good point. And on the other hand, it does occur to me that if you've got somebody who is not like world super hacker, you're almost driven to have a character who does have that skill, since you don't want to endow him with that skill and make him too remote from us. So, you know, Joey is an essential character if you're going to write this particular book, right?
It's good for him to have a crew, and you know, and to get all those interactions, and especially the interactions in ways that aren't adoring.
Right. So the same for you if you had somebody that really needed like super hacking skills.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You
So,
import a hacker, so to
right,
speak.
yeah. And so Juliana, in fact, she reaches a point where she realizes she gets some advice from a judge who's a friend of hers, who gives her a business card and says, "You need this guy, and this guy is a PI, a private investigator named Hirsch."
I thought you were going to say Orphan X. I thought we were going to do a
It all
crossover.
comes
next.
together, exactly. Right, I love that. Mashup. That would be cool, right? Juliana does need Orphan X, actually. And yeah, so, and then she can hire a hacker, right? But she herself knows nothing about that sort of thing.
Well, you know, it used to be that if you were writing thrillers, you needed like a muscle backup. We had Bubba.
Yeah.
You know, we had Elvis before he, you know, went more mainstream.
With
you know.
Spike.
We
with,
always had
Pike
Hawk.
and
You
yeah,
know,
Hawk. Hawk
but
was the great.
now,
Yeah.
really, instead of like the backup muscle, what we have to have is, you know, the person with the tech, which is
Yeah.
really how the PI profession has gone.
Yeah.
Who was it I just talking to that
Good point.
in writing a PI, going blank. Anyway, in order to write a PI story, went to visit an actual PI and discovered that, you know, it's all about computers and internet searches and all. It's
Right.
really not about the bottle and the gun in the drawer and all that stuff.
Exactly.
You know, it's an interesting evolution. So in a way, the super hacker is becoming almost a stock character, you know, that's
Yeah,
figures into
so
the
do they
books.
make good characters? Does a hacker make a good character? Do you want to root for a hacker? I mean,
I don't know, I think of him more as a tool,
As a
you know,
tool.
yeah,
I
rather
think
than
so.
a lead.
Think of war games.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
That's part of why I seeded it in the you know the hacker character in the you know in the body and persona of a 16-year-old girl, because it's a really fun dynamic, and it pulls you know Evan in. He had such a relationship with his handler and father figure that then all of a sudden he's in this situation that he doesn't want to be in at all, where he has this avuncular relationship with her that he's responsible for her, but neither of them can express emotion well, and so there's all this other stuff that happens. And the talk, you know, it has to be right or you'll hear about it. You know, like
Yep.
if you make a gun mistake, like
I
we could die, and they'll like dig up our corpses and yell at us, the gun people, for the mistake. You can't make a gun mistake, and you can't kill a cat.
Can't, right, or a dog. Can't kill a dog.
Cat people are worse than dog people.
Is that, you think?
But with the hacker stuff, part of it is you want it to have that kind of ring of verisimilitude. I always think about like in ER. How many of you guys watched ER? I mean, there would be this like constant patter that you hear and you pick up every third thing, but what it means is like expertise is happening right now. You know, and so you're trying to drop the clues in. You don't need to keep up with all of it, but you need it embedded in something that is dramatically compelling.
It's a problem in the narrative because you don't want to make the reader think, do I have to understand all this stuff? You know, in ER, it was all this chatter, and you didn't get most of it, right? It's leaders of this and that, and I forget, right? But in a book, it's a little more difficult, I think, to sort of render that kind of crosstalk and say, don't worry about it. You're not responsible for this. You don't need to know this.
Right. Well, there's that great line, and I forget who said it, but I'm sure you've heard it, where because we do all this research, right, and then you need only the telling details peek into the plot, right? So when I was younger, I used to think, because I do all this, like I went undercover to mind control cults and went up and stunned airplanes. Like I love doing all this stuff, and I'd want to put it in a book, even if it got too much, you know. So editing that is always so hard. But somebody said at one point they were reading something that was a particular laden passage of somebody else, and they said your research slip is showing. Right? It's like you have to be careful that everything is in service of the story.
That's right. That's right. It's like the old cliche is that research is like an iceberg, and you should only see the top whatever percentage or not anything else. And a lot of writers like to show off the research they did to make it clear they did a lot of research, and damn it, you're going to hear about it.
Especially historians.
Especially
I'm guilty
historians.
of that.
That's right.
There's a
Yeah.
role for afterwards. It's like the director's cut or
Yeah.
something. You know,
Yeah.
you can actually do a lot with an
Well, there's a
afterward.
certain type of book that work. Like you think about Crichton or Clancy, can get very intricate about a lot of details, and there's a lot of people who like that style. Like for me, everything's kind of drawn through on the through line of character. It has to lead with character. I mean, and so one of the things I always think of is like all the moments we think about when you talk to people about James Bond, for instance, or these characters that we love. It's always like how he takes his martini. It's not necessarily like the sixth turn of the eighth action scene that we think of, right? It's always the human moments.
Right. Right. It's about character. It's about human elements. What
So
the-
let's go back to something Gregg was talked about, and you have too, which is, you know, if you're writing a standalone and you can pick them up and drop them wherever you want to, it's really a scarier ride for the reader in the sense that
Yeah.
nobody may survive. Juliana may, in fact, wind up in Boston Harbor,
Right.
or
You don't know.
you know, and I do think that that's an interesting variation, you know,
Yeah.
on not a variation. It's different. It's a different story if everyone in it is in jeopardy, or
Right.
everyone can die.
Yeah. I think that's right. I don't think that Orphan X is going to get killed because I know there are more books coming, right? And yet something could happen to him. We don't know, right? So
But there are the challenges, wondering, you know, how he will survive, what Gregg can put him through,
Right.
and he can still come out, you know, able to stagger into the next book, even if he might have lost a limb or you know whatever. So that's a different ride for the reader.
You know what was really tricky? For a while, I wrote comics, and I wrote Batman for a few years for DC, and that's really interesting because there's all these constraints on the character where like he can't look bad. And there was like a big joke that at one point an editor from DC said Batman should never be sitting. And if you think about it, it's like you don't usually see Batman sitting, right? So there's all these protective barriers around these characters who are in a sort of public trust almost, right? Like my dad feels like he owns Batman as much as, you know, the copyright holders as much as my kids.
Right.
And, you know, when we're dead and gone, everyone will still be reading Batman. But it's interesting because you're very limited in what you can do.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in TV writing, there's a term they have for the fake peril when you know someone's going to be fine, especially when it's like a cliffhang, and they call it schmuck bait, which I love. Like, oh my God, is she going to be dead after the commercial break? And it's like, she's not going to be dead, right? It's like we're the, you know. And so there's this really funny game that you're sort of vacillating around with that, and it's very pronounced with comic book characters, because it's like you can't have Batman make a mistake and
Yeah.
kill an innocent person, and you can't have him be really showed up and humiliated. You can't, and so that at a point you're like, you're bringing your own energy and creativity to this, but it's a tightrope act with trying to honor the history. And in a weird way, with the series, it's a lesser process of that because, you know, it's like I own Orphan X, I can do anything with him that I want.
Okay.
But there are certain constraints and things that are out of character and that aren't suitable that you can play with, you know,
Yeah.
any way that you want.
But you also, when you start an Orphan X book, you have to remember everything you said about the character before, right?
Yeah.
You've got to sort of remember that. And that's, I don't know about you, but in the case of the Nick Heller books, I had to reread the first couple books to remind myself what his life story was like. I sort of created this life story. So in order to keep writing the series, I do have constraints,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Right.
Did you have to
And
go back and look at your research for that character?
yeah, I did. Yeah, and actually, I re-researched. I have a scene in there, a special ops scene in there. I mean, they did some research on that. I had to. You
And
know.
even some of the, he hates broccoli or he doesn't hate broccoli.
Right, exactly.
It rounds out the character.
Right, these little moments.
You need a continuity.
Eye
novel.
color is the worst.
Yeah.
You get somewhere and you want to have a description of someone's eyes, and like I keep a kind of Bible of some of that stuff of like what side is the hair shaved on, or like where's the birthmark. Like there's all the stuff you keep track of, but if you lose one of them, it's not obvious how to do the search to find it sometimes.
Right. No, that's right.
Well, actually, you do have a tool available, which is your readers. And I have talked to authors who, when they absolutely can't remember something, you know, will just ask.
That seems so humiliating. You're like, dear Twitterverse.
Right. I don't know that it's humiliating. I think it probably makes them feel like they're part of the whole story creation.
They
you
don't
know?
want me. My readers don't want to think that I've lost a step, but I
Yeah.
don't know
It's
my
a
own character.
I know. It's a good thing this isn't being recorded.
Right, yes, sir.
we're gonna see Orphan X on the TV screen and Netflix or movies, and talking about that, I wanna know what you thought of the movies that were made of your books and what involvement you had with those movies.
Sure. Greg, you
Okay.
start.
Well, so I initially adapted Orphan X for Bradley Cooper under his. He had a deal with Warner Brothers, and then I lost him to A Star Is Born and was really mad until I saw A Star Is Born, and he was really good. So then I'm not mad at him anymore. And so I got the rights back, and one of the things I want to do is to set it up where each book forms a spine of a season, like a streaming season. So we're just in the process of doing that now. I have Justin Lin attached, who directed the Fast and the Furious movies. I have a great team of guys who would co-showrun with me. Actually, Al Goff and Miles Millar, who have a book coming out. They created Smallville, and they run Into the Badlands and Shannara Chronicles. And they have a book coming out in March, and they should come visit you. I will tell them to come visit you.
Why don't you do that? What an excellent idea.
But so there's a good team around it, but what I don't want to do, I want to set it up when we know that it's gonna go. I don't need development. I don't need an announcement about more development. I don't need more nonsense about it. So what we're really trying to do is figure out if we can steer it into the right place to be made in the right way.
What about the movies that you?
Yeah, so I've had 2 movies made. One was High Crimes with Morgan Freeman and Ashley Judd, and one was Paranoia with Harrison Ford.
Great book.
And thank you, and Gary Oldman. This is being recorded, right? I'm under the things I can't say. Let's just say I loved High Crimes. I thought that was I
You
really
love the
enjoyed it.
deal for Paranoia was epic, right?
Yes,
That was fun.
yes, that was for the deal was fun.
Certainly
That's right.
had wonderful casts.
The cast, when they told me Harrison Ford is going to play one of the characters, I just thought that was perfect.
You started with corporate intrigue.
Yeah.
They were some of the best page turners ever. How'd you transition from the corporate intrigue to and your background is Russian studies?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the corporate thing was sort of an accident because I wanted to do a spy novel sort of based on an early Le Carre book, Spy That Came Into the Cold.
Oh yeah?
And I wanted to set it in the corporate world just because I thought 2 big corporations fighting, that could be really interesting. So I sort of angled into it that way, knowing nothing about the corporate world. And then that got such a reaction that people were saying, well, let's do another one set in the corporate world. And I realized that there are thrillers set in the legal world, but very rarely in the corporate world. Why is that? And I just think it's because a lot of writers lack the imagination to sort of flesh it out to make it real. Or maybe if you've worked in the business world and the corporate world, you consider it boring. Well, not to you, not to me. I don't consider it boring. So, so Judgment is not obviously set in the corporate world. It's set, she's a judge in Boston. But my interest was in her personality and the morality. And I wanted to sort of have us wrestle with this moral thing. And in fact, she's presiding over a case in the book, a sexual discrimination case, based on a real one. It takes place in a company sort of based on Uber. I call it Wheels. And
With a Z?
with a Z, of course. And it's got that kind of, that company has the bro culture that you see in Silicon Valley, which she finds disgusting, but she's a judge and she can't let her feelings show. So this is happening in parallel, and she doesn't know that that is connected to why she was set up in Chicago.
You know what's so interesting, just real quick about that with lawyers, I think part of it is there's a lot of legal thrillers because a
Yeah.
lot of lawyers want to be writers.
That's right.
Because a lot of lawyers study English, and a lot of guys who go and get an MBA are studying economics or business. So I wonder if there's something in the field that they come out with. You know, if you look at Thoreau, if you look at Grisham, I mean, you go down the list.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. But there aren't a ton of corporate thrillers.
They really are. Yeah.
I'm curious about geography.
Yeah.
You've got Chicago in your background, you've got New England in your education. And so do you find yourself gravitating in any particular direction for your settings?
Yeah, Boston because it's easier. I live there. I don't have to do the research. I've lived there for 30 years or something, and I know it. You know, I root for the Red Sox now. You know?
Oh my God.
Sorry about that. Right.
Pray for you.
Right, exactly. And I'm sorry to say the Patriots.
Ooh.
Right? Very unpopular, I realize that. Everyone hates
They're
them.
just unpopular like the Yankees were unpopular.
Right.
They're good for so long.
Exactly, right.
I say that as a Yankee.
So did you have a question?
Yes,
Okay.
about a couple books I read of yours is about the judicial area. And one
Yeah.
in Washington DC had a fixer
Yep.
on the Supreme Court. What got you into the judicial area?
Yeah, it was my research on guilty minds.
Yes.
When I decided to have a character who's a Supreme Court justice
Yeah.
who's in trouble.
Yes.
And I just thought that was really interesting.
It was.
And I wanted to sort of
Very.
carry that out. Yeah.
But you, this is another judge.
Yeah.
So
she's-
that's why I'm wondering why, just.
Just
curiosity.
because I wanted, because I didn't think I could do it with a Supreme Court justice. I wanted this to be someone who's more accessible, as they say.
Accessible.
Right.
It's also true that all legal thrillers don't have to be rooted in criminal cases,
No.
you know.
No, that's right.
And I think that, in fact, most of the bar is not doing criminal cases, so it's really interesting, I
Right.
think, the way you go about it and see what's happening. So Greg, you've just told us you've got a contract for 3 more, so we can
Well, it's
assume that Orphan X is reappearing in your next book.
But we're also ahead of schedule, so the next one's already owned, but they came in early to lock it up. So there's Orphan X at least through 2023 if you guys will keep reading them.
And Joe, you've already said that you're writing a new one for Mr. Heller, and
I
then
am.
you're going to think about a standalone. I always like to leave you thinking that they're working so that you can anticipate more books. I don't want to do any bet where we all say, and I've come to the end. When John Sanford writes Final Prey, I'm not going to let him come to the store. I've already told him that.
No, right. No, we're always working. I mean, if you do a book a year, you're always writing a book. I mean, my head is in the Nick Heller right now, and so I have to remember what Juliana was like. It takes
Very true. So I would like to, Patrick, are you around? Say goodbye, one Patrick or the other, to our video audience. So you have to be named Patrick or John to work here. This is very complicated. Women's names are easier, right, Susan?